The hum of the engines was steady, like a lullaby, as the night stretched endlessly outside the windows of Flight 728 bound for Madrid. Most of the passengers had settled into the soft rhythm of the red eye, a few reading, many dozing, some whispering across the aisle in hushed tones. Row 12 was quiet, except for a woman leaning against the window, her long hair slipping from its bun, her breathing even and peaceful. Her name was Elena Markovich, 35 years old, a flight passenger who had no intention of drawing attention to herself. She had boarded like everyone else, smiled politely at the crew, buckled in, and closed her eyes. No one knew her secret. The flight had been smooth for the first 4 hours. The cabin lights were dimmed, and the stewardesses walked softly in the aisles. Then, at exactly 2:43 a.m., everything changed. A sudden ding echoed across the cabin, followed by the captain's voice, tight, urgent, and edged with something no passenger wanted to hear: fear. Ladies and gentlemen, if there is a licensed pilot on board, please make yourself known to the crew immediately. The cabin stirred awake like a hive shaken from slumber. Murmurs filled the air, heads lifted from headrests. The words seemed unbelievable. What could possibly require another pilot? Row 12 remained still. Elena did not move, though her heart gave a violent jolt inside her chest. Dash dash dash. The whispered panic. A man in row 9 twisted in his seat toward his wife. Did he just say, yes? She whispered sharply. He said pilot. Oh my God. The flight attendants moved quickly, their faces composed but their eyes betraying urgency. One stopped by row 14, kneeling beside a passenger. Sir, do you have any flight experience? The man shook his head in bewilderment. No, God, no. Row 12. Elena shifted slightly but kept her eyes shut, as though still asleep. Her mind raced. Not again, not after all these years. She had left that life behind. She had sworn never to return to it. But fate was cruel, and fate was knocking loudly at 30,000 feet. Dash dash dash. What the crew knew. In the cockpit, Captain Rivera was pale, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold airflow. His co-pilot, Alvarez, lay slumped in his seat, unconscious, his lips tinged gray. Minutes earlier, he had complained of chest pain. Then, mid-sentence, he collapsed. The captain was alone. One pilot, one plane, 216 souls on board. And Rivera himself was feeling faint, his hands trembling uncontrollably. He knew what was coming. He wasn't going to last much longer at the controls. That was why his voice had cracked as he made the announcement. If no one came forward, they were in grave danger. Dash dash dash. The decision. Elena opened her eyes. She stared at the faint reflection of herself in the window, haunted eyes, a scar just below her jawline, the face of a woman who had once lived in the skies. She remembered it vividly. Her years in the military. The cockpit of a MiG fighter jet, the roar of engines, the lethal responsibility of her role. She had been one of the youngest fighter pilots in her division, until a single mission went wrong. Her wingman had not returned. The guilt had destroyed her. She had resigned, walked away, and she had promised herself never again. But now, 200 lives. Her hands clenched on the armrest. Her breathing slowed. A decision crystallized in her mind. She unbuckled her seatbelt. The man beside her glanced up, startled, as Elena stood. She ignored his look. She stepped into the aisle, steady, calm. And with every step toward the galley, whispers trailed her. Is she? Do you think? She looks so sure. A flight attendant spotted her, eyes widening as Elena leaned in close. I can fly this plane, she said. Quietly. The attendant blinked, stunned. Are you serious? Yes, I was a pilot, military, not commercial, but I can handle it. The attendant's face lit with something halfway between hope and disbelief. She seized Elena's arm and hurried her down the aisle toward the cockpit. Passengers craned their necks to watch. Some whispered prayers. Some clutched their children tighter. Row 12 was empty now. Dash dash dash. Into the cockpit. The heavy door sealed shut behind her, muting the chaos outside. The sight hit her like a punch. The co-pilot was sprawled motionless, oxygen mask clamped over his face. Captain Rivera looked barely upright, his breathing shallow. His eyes widened as he recognized her uniform posture, the unmistakable presence of a trained aviator. Do you have experience? Elena slid into the right-hand seat without hesitation. Military flight hours. Fighters. But I can do this. Rivera exhaled in relief, then grimaced in pain. Thank God. We've lost him, and I don't have long. He gestured weakly toward Alvarez. Alina's hands moved instinctively, scanning the panels, familiarizing herself. Different layout, different avionics, but principles were the same. She felt a pulse of adrenaline steady her nerves. Rivera's voice was low. Madrid Control already knows we're in trouble. You'll have to talk to them. Her throat tightened. She hadn't spoken on comms in years. But she reached for the headset, pulling it over her ears. This is Flight 728, she said, her voice cracking at first, then firming with each word. We have a medical emergency. One pilot incapacitated. I am a qualified pilot taking control. There was a pause, then static, then a calm controller's voice. Copy that, Flight 728. State your name, please. Elena hesitated. The name she hadn't spoken in years tasted strange on her tongue. Captain Elena Markovich, former military pilot. The weight of the cabin. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin buzzed with tension. The announcement had confirmed it. The plane was being flown by a passenger. Mothers hugged their children. Strangers clutched hands. In row 9, the man whispered, "We're all going to die." But his wife shook her head fiercely. No. Did you see her? She walked like someone who knows what she's doing. Row 12 was silent, its occupant now in the front, holding everyone's fate. The first trial. Altitude 29,000, maintain heading, the air traffic controller instructed. Alina's hands steadied the yoke. Her muscle memory returned like an old song. Roger that. Rivera's voice was faint. You're doing good. You can land her. Her stomach turned. Landing. That was the real test. A fighter jet was one thing. A commercial airliner, massive, heavy, and carrying precious lives, was another. And as if fate wanted to remind her, a sudden jolt rocked the plane. Gasps erupted in the cabin. The seatbelt signs lit up. Rivera cursed under his breath. We've lost one hydraulic system. You'll have to compensate manually. Elena gritted her teeth. Her hands moved quickly, making the necessary adjustments, fighting the trembling in her fingers. The cabin was holding its breath. 200 lives suspended in the balance. She glanced once at Rivera, who was barely conscious now, then forward through the windshield at the endless black sky. Don't worry, she whispered, almost to herself. I won't let you fall. For the first time in years, she was back where she belonged. But whether she could bring them all safely down, that was a question no one yet knew the answer to. The cockpit smelled faintly of ozone, hot electronics, and fear. Elena gripped the yoke tighter, her pulse hammering in her ears. Every sound mattered now, the whine of the engines, the shuffle of the captain's weakening breaths, the steady chatter of air traffic control in her headset. Flight 728, confirm controls are stable. Elena drew in a breath. Controls stable for now. One hydraulic system gone, but I can manage. The controller's voice was calm, professional. Copy that. You are cleared to divert to Barajas International, Madrid. Expect emergency services on arrival. Madrid. The irony nearly made her laugh. She had sworn never to see that city again, not after her discharge, not after what happened with her wingman. And now she was flying 200 civilians straight into its heart. Her jaw tightened. Roger. Diverting to Madrid. The cabin tension. Behind the cockpit door, the cabin had become a fragile ecosystem of whispers, prayers, and forced calm. Children sensed their parents' unease. Flight attendants moved with strained smiles, whispering instructions to each other in clipped tones. A businessman in row 7 argued with a stewardess. This is madness. A passenger is flying us. The stewardess forced her voice steady. She's not just a passenger, sir. She's a trained pilot. The captain himself authorized her. Still, panic gnawed at the air. Some passengers wrote farewell messages on their phones. Others held hands across aisles. And yet, a strange thread of hope lingered. The sight of Elena striding forward had kindled something, belief. In the cockpit, Rivera's voice was weak. You've done this before, haven't you? Elena's eyes stayed forward, scanning instruments. Not this exactly. Fighters, not airliners. But principles don't change. Why'd you stop? She hesitated. The memories hit sharp and raw. The mission, the explosion, her wingman's jet spiraling into fire. She had been the one leading the squadron. She had made the call. And he never came home. Her voice was low, because one mistake cost a life. I couldn't carry that weight anymore. Rivera's eyes softened. And yet here you are, carrying 200. She didn't reply. She couldn't. Communication with ground. Flight 728, Expect vectors for descent in 10 minutes, the controller said. Elena swallowed. The landing. That was the true mountain ahead. Commercial landings required delicacy, precision, and teamwork. And she had neither co-pilot nor training in this particular aircraft. Understood, she answered. The radio crackled again. Another voice broke through, deeper, firmer. Elena Markovich, this is Commander Ortega, Spanish Air Force. Her chest tightened. She knew the voice. He had been her superior once, years ago. Elena, is it really you? Her throat went dry. It's me. A pause, thick with unspoken history. Then Ortega said, I'm patching in to guide you. You can do this. Just trust your hands. The weight of the past and present collided. But his voice steadied her. Descent. The lights of Madrid glittered faintly on the horizon like a promise, or a threat. Elena, begin descent to 12,000 feet, Ortega instructed. She adjusted the throttles, lowering power, feeling the aircraft respond sluggishly but obediently. The nose dipped. The plane shuddered, then steadied. Passengers gasped as the shift in altitude pressed against their ears. Babies cried. Mothers hushed them, whispering lullabies. In row 12, the empty seat seemed almost symbolic now, a space left behind by the woman who carried their fate. The storm. As if fate wasn't finished testing her, dark clouds loomed ahead. Radar lit up with patches of turbulence. Rivera swore softly. Of all nights, Elena gritted her teeth. Storms meant unpredictability. Crosswinds, lightning, unstable descent paths. For a seasoned commercial pilot with full crew, it was difficult. For her, alone, it was near impossible. But, she had no choice. The first jolt hit them hard, throwing coffee cups and rattling overhead bins. Screams pierced the cabin. Oxygen masks swayed menacingly above, though none deployed. Elena's knuckles whitened on the yoke. Come on, hold together. Her instincts kicked in, correcting pitch, balancing roll, compensating for the lost hydraulics. Sweat trickled down her temple, but her breathing stayed calm, measured. She wasn't just flying a plane. She was wrestling fate. The voice of the past. Elena, Ortega's voice came through, calm but firm. Remember when we trained in Zaragoza? Crosswinds on runway 23. You handled them like no one else. She almost laughed. That was years ago. You're still that pilot. You just forgot. Tonight, you'll remember. His faith was like a rope thrown into darkness. She grabbed it. Final approach. Flight 728, cleared to land runway 18R. Winds 15 knots cross from the left, the tower announced. Her heart pounded. Crosswinds. Of course. Rivera, barely conscious, whispered, You've got this. Elena took a deep breath. She lined up the runway lights glowing ahead. The aircraft was heavy, slower to respond than the fighters she once flew. Every correction lagged, every second mattered. The cabin was silent now. No whispers, no cries, just 200 souls waiting. The landing, 500 feet, the altimeter announced automatically. Elena's grip was iron. She eased the throttles, adjusted rudder, fought the wind. The plane tilted, veered, corrected. 300, she whispered to herself, steady, steady. 200, the runway loomed like salvation. 50, 40, 30. She flared. The tires screeched against asphalt. The plane bounced once, violently, then kissed down again, harder this time. Oxygen masks swung wildly. Passengers screamed. Elena held on, braking carefully, compensating for the lost hydraulics, wrestling the yoke until the beast slowed. And then, silence. The aircraft rolled to a shaky stop on the runway, emergency vehicles already racing toward them with flashing lights. For a moment, no one breathed. Then, from the cabin, a sound began, soft, disbelieving applause that swelled into cheers, tears, sobs of relief. She had done it. Aftermath. Emergency crews swarmed the plane, rushing the unconscious co-pilot and Rivera onto stretchers. The captain, before being wheeled away, caught Elena's hand weakly. You saved them. Don't ever doubt who you are. Her throat tightened. She nodded, unable to speak. When the cockpit door opened, passengers saw her standing there, sweat-soaked, exhausted, trembling slightly but alive. The applause roared louder. Strangers wept. Children waved. She wasn't just the woman asleep in row 12 anymore. She was their savior. Alone at dawn. Hours later, when the passengers were safe inside the terminal and reporters clamored outside security gates, Elena sat alone by a window, watching the dawn spread across Madrid. She expected shame, or guilt, or the familiar weight of memory. Instead, she felt something else, a quiet peace. Ortega appeared beside her. "I knew you still had it." She glanced at him. "I thought I'd buried that part of me." He shook his head. "Some parts of us can't be buried. And maybe they shouldn't." For the first time in years, she allowed herself a small smile. She had flown again. She had carried lives again. And this time, no one was lost. Epilogue. In the official report, she was listed simply as Elena Markovich, former pilot, passenger. But to the 216 souls of Flight 728, she was more than that. She was proof that sometimes, salvation comes from the seat you least expect. Row 12 would never just be row 12 again.